My guest today for the big interview is Congressman Khanna, who is a leader of the Progressive Caucus Democrats in the House. So we'll be talking about antitrust and the future of a lot of structural progressive changes in the economy. Congressman, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, you're a regular now. We ought to do this kind of on a regular basis.
I love it.
Okay, it's a deal. But I got a lot of questions for you. First of all, you have become, and I'm very proud of you for this, one of the leaders of the Progressive Caucus, or the progressives in Congress. What does that mean to you? I mean, when the word progressive, why shouldn't all Democrats be progressives?
Well, we're working on it. We got 96 people in the Progressive Caucus now, and it's stronger than it's ever been. To me, it's about basic economic fairness and rewriting the rules of the economy so everyone has a chance, and also having economic policy that's going to actually empower the middle class and working class.
Why should everybody who's a Democrat, why shouldn't they all be in favor of everything you just stated? Isn't that the legacy of the Democratic Party? Why wouldn't anybody not be in favor of all of that?
Well, I think people get uneasy when it comes to rewriting some of the rules of the economy and talking about how stock buybacks aren't working, and actually that's because of choices we've made, or talking about rules we've had in the tax code that have incentivized corporate CEO pay to rise because we didn't have the right deduction or allowed for deductions over $1 million, or talking about why we shouldn't have a $15 minimum wage. So everyone will rhetorically say that they believe that every person should have a shot in the economy, but they don't see how some of the rules and structures have led to the concentrated wealth.
But it's not hard to see that if you want to see it. I mean, are they just willingly, intentionally blind, or do they not want to see it? And if they don't want to see it, why don't they want to see it? We're talking about Democrats now,
right.
Not Republicans. We'll get to them in a minute.
Well, I know the popular answer is, well, are they beholden to their donors, or are they beholden to special interests? And sure, some of that is true. There is too much special interest money. But as I've gotten to know folks, I think it's actually deeper than that. I think some of these folks genuinely believe that their success is self-driven, or that people's success is self-driven. And I think it comes down to a fundamental question of, do you believe that your individual initiative in a relatively fair rules of the game are driving successful economic outcomes? Or do you believe that you've been one of the privileged because you happen to be born in the right family with the right circumstances, with the right education? And sure, it was a little bit of hard work, but the rules really were tilted to allow you to have advantages. And I think that's the fundamental difference in the different wings of the party.
But surely it's both. I mean, the individual initiative and responsibility are part of it, but it's hugely a matter of where you were born, who you were born to, and what advantages you got, and that's not hard to see. Why shouldn't every Democrat be saying equal opportunity and really believe in equal opportunity and no dynasty, no aristocracy? I mean, we're on the verge of having a new aristocracy in this country. Don't all Democrats see that?
Unfortunately not. I mean, I think that's what the 2020 presidential debate is going to be about, that there is dynastic wealth, there's huge economic concentration. I mean, Democrats should be for antitrust law and strong antitrust law. Democrats should be for expanding the earned income tax credit. They should be for a $15 minimum wage. They should be for Medicare for all. They should be for taking on the prescription drugs and patent reform. I mean, let me give you an example. In the Oversight Committee, Humira, that we had the pharmaceuticals in. Humira as a drug. Guess how many patents they have for that one drug on arthritis? They have 100 patents. Because they patent not just the medicine, they patent how the medicine is packaged, how it is distributed, and every part of it is basically giving them a market exclusivity. So these are the structural issues that people need to go at. But that's much more difficult than just saying, well, I think the rich should pay a little bit more and we should redistribute to give folks more money for education. We're talking about fundamental injustices in the market economy. Yes, we talked about that, FDR. FDR said, I believe in free enterprise, but I don't believe in free enterprise for the privileged and the connected. I believe in free enterprise that actually rewards work and ideas. And we have to, I think, get back to that concept.
Yeah, but 30 years after the Second World War, Democrats really did parrot what FDR said. And we had an economy that was not perfect, certainly for women and for blacks and for others, but it was moving in the right direction. And then, as you know, in the late 70s, early 80s, everything switched. And we started to create the same kind of aristocracy we had in the late 19th century. We were going back to the robber barons. And you and other progressives in Congress are fighting that, and I salute you for it. But I tell you, it's frustrating to be on the stands and see not every Democrat understand the importance of this.
Well, your voice matters. Your videos go viral, and we certainly share them with all our progressive colleagues. And I think we're winning the debate. But people are still stuck in the frame that Reagan created, which was, he said, the government is the problem, and we've got to massively cut taxes and unleash the private sector. And that, unfortunately, has been the frame we've been arguing in since 1980. We need to fundamentally reorient the frame and say that policy has led to the erosion of the working class and the erosion of the middle class, and it hasn't been good, actually, for America's competitiveness. I mean, it's not what built America. It was the public investments in education and research in places like National Science Foundation that even built Silicon Valley.
Well, there are two different frames, aren't there? There's the public investment frame.
Right.
And, even Bill Clinton and putting people first was all about investing in people. But there is a new frame that I thought you were getting at a moment ago, and that is that the market itself is a creation of legislators and agency heads and judges and everybody else, and they are being influenced by certain groups that have a lot of wealth and that have a lot of power, and the rules of the game have to be changed, have to be altered.
Let me give you a concrete example in stock buybacks, right? Before 1982, stock buybacks were basically illegal. They were insider trading. You shouldn't, as a corporation, think about it. Why should you be able to buy your own stock? You have all this inside information. And then Reagan appointed
John Shad.
Yes, John Shad,
SEC,
who was a Wall Street banker. Yeah. And he comes and says, no, it's not market manipulation. It's perfectly legal. So what's the outcome? Now, the pharmaceutical companies, all the money they're making on the high drug prices, they're not putting it on research and development. That's been flat last 10 years. They're using it for stock buybacks, which is enriching their shareholders and enriching executives. That's a choice that we made. It's a rule in this distorted market economy. You could say stock buybacks are market manipulation and still believe in a free enterprise system, but that would actually get back to a more fair place that rewarded work. Like that, there are numerous choices we've made.
Now, you represent Silicon Valley.
Right.
Some of your constituents are very rich, and they are major Democratic donors.
Sure.
When you say maybe no more stock buybacks, they say, Congressman, good idea.
They said, there goes Khanna again. It's I've said no stock buybacks. I've said they ought to pay tax on the earnings overseas. I mean, what under the Trump tax cuts, they aren't paying any tax on offshore earnings. I've said that we need to have a $15 minimum wage, and they ought to be treating contractors with some bargaining power. I mean, right now what they've done is they've offshored a lot of the food services and service jobs, bus drivers, and so they don't have any bargaining power, and they're being paid below market wages. Here's what the argument I make to them so that they tolerate me. I say, look, you don't need my help to make extraordinary wealth. You're doing just fine. But you need my help to tell your story across this country so that there is not a resentment of all of the things you want to do. What do you ultimately want to do? You want to spread information. You want to make the world more connected at its best. If we continue this economic divide, you're going to see an anti-immigrant sentiment. You're going to see an anti-globalization sentiment. You're going to see an anti-technology sentiment.
We already do. But do you take that argument? You said you did it so they're not resented. But do you take the argument to the point of, let's say, antitrust? And you and I have talked a little bit about this before, but you've got big companies that are basically sucking up more and more of the juice of America. I mean, Apple and Facebook and Google, they're the steel magnates and railroad magnates and oil magnates of the robber baron days of the last Gilded Age. I mean, what about breaking them up or licensing their technology? Or what do they say when you suggest that maybe there's some real deep structural problems in having the market power they do?
Well, they push back. They say we have free things and we're very popular and we've got 70% approval and you're at 15% collectively at Congress. But then when you push more and you say, should Facebook really have been allowed to acquire Instagram and WhatsApp. I don't believe they should have, or at least the FTC should have reviewed it. So then when Mark Zuckerberg was hauled in front of Congress and he was asked, who are your competitors? Imagine if he could have given an honest answer and said Instagram and WhatsApp, but he wasn't able to do that. And what I have said is, look, what makes Silicon Valley innovative isn't these huge gargantuan companies. It used to be having little startups and a lot of new companies, and that has declined. And so
it's declined markedly. I mean, across this country, there's been a remarkable decline in startups.
Right.
And some of that has been attributed to these gigantic, particularly tech conglomerates.
Right. Now, they will say, well, look, no tech company has been dominant for that many years. AOL used to be dominant. They're no longer dominant. Microsoft is no longer dominant. But that was because there was the time case, right? Imagine if Microsoft, David Boies hadn't gone after Microsoft, and Microsoft had been allowed to package Windows with their internet service browser. You could have easily imagined then all of search being done on Microsoft, and you never would have had Google. So the strong enforcement of antitrust law has allowed for innovation, and you don't want to pull up the drawbridge. You want to have new companies. And what I say is I represent Silicon Valley. I don't represent a particular company. I want to preserve that innovative entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we disagree on parts. And I've said, look, not all big is bad, and you can't just paint everything in one brush. But you can certainly say, let's scrutinize mergers. Let's scrutinize anti-competitive practices where you're privileging your own products. Let's license some of the technology or have some fee so that you're allowing for new innovative activity. And by the way, you're still going to make, maybe you won't make 50 billion, you'll make a couple billion, and you're still going to have a place in the history book. So no one is depriving you of success.
What about surveillance capitalism? I mean, you have these companies that are really soaking up a lot of data. I mean, they're just gigantic data mining systems, and privacy is going to be a thing of the past. In fact, right now, you see, in fact, there's a big controversy between Apple and Facebook because of all of the kind of infractions of personal privacy that are going on right now. What do you say to your big Silicon Valley executives about what they ought to do?
Right. Well, as you know, Nancy Pelosi asked me to draft the Internet Bill of Rights, and it was all about this idea, starting by the fact that you own your data. There should be some basic rights. You should be able to consent before you give your data. You should know what happens to your data. I mean, for example, if you want to know your financial credit report, you can go and figure it out. If you want to know who all has data about you, I guarantee you, you could put all your research assistants, it would take them weeks to figure that out. It shouldn't be that hard. You should be able to know what's happening to your data, who they're giving it to. You should be able to delete your data. You should be able to move your data. There's some very basic things that we can do which prioritizes individuals' control over their own data.
And this is likely to get through the House, do you think?
I think there is a good chance that it's going to at least move in the House. The Energy and Commerce Committee, Jan Schakowsky, is the chair of the relevant subcommittee. She's working on a bill, and I'm working very closely with her with the Internet Bill of Rights. It's a priority for Pelosi. And again, I think what I tell these tech companies is, look, you have one of the biggest assets right now in the country. You largely have extraordinary approval ratings. I mean, their trust factor, even after all the scandals, is about 58% for Facebook. Google and Apple are about 70%.
And their profits.
And their profits are through the...
Did you see those fourth quarter
I
results?
did. I read it. So other than the military, I mean, Congress has lost all credibility. The president doesn't have credibility. Media doesn't have credibility. You have public trust, but you can squander that in 6 months. You can squander that trust so easily. Why are you not responding to this crisis of public trust after the Equifax breach, after the breach with Facebook, and leading? And, they should be out there saying, yes, we understand the need for regulation.
So Mark Zuckerberg is saying yes?
No, Zuckerberg, I think Cheryl should step up. I mean, I'm not picking sides, but there are voices. I mean, Cheryl served in the Clinton administration. She understands government. She understands that there's a balance. This is a time for leadership, right? I think Silicon Valley is going to be fine in terms of their economic future. And most of the people who live in Palo Alto or Cupertino, they're going to be fine. But the question is this: do they answer the nation's call to service? Do they understand that there are huge communities that have been totally left out of economic opportunity? Do they understand that their people are fearful of the future? They want to know, are they going to be protected in the future online? And they understand that Silicon Valley may have a technical expertise, but the question is, are they going to use that for the good of Google or Facebook, or are they going to use that for the country's good?
Isn't there also another problem or another question about aggregate demand? I mean, who is going to actually be able to afford all of this technology if wages continue to stagnate or decline in real terms? I mean, artificial intelligence comes along, takes away a lot of jobs. It's going to have a downward pressure on wages. Does Silicon Valley have any notion that maybe people are not going to be able to afford to buy what Silicon Valley has to offer?
I think they're aware of that, and I'll tell you, you know the statistics. Since 1979, wages in this country have been totally flat. I was on a panel at MIT in Walmart. Right before my panel, Walmart's senior vice president for human resources was bragging that they're using artificial intelligence and their workers are so much more productive because they can use technology to now stock the shelves. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so workers are more productive. Usually basic economics 101, workers are more productive. They should be paid more. Of course, productivity has gone up by Walmart's own admission, but their wages have been flat. So the problem in this country has been that the gains of productivity in manufacturing and technology, they're going to the shareholder class, they're going to executives. They aren't going to the people who need them, the middle class and the working class who are going to buy the products. And this is why I think the progressives need to be a pro-economic growth message. We need to say, actually, what's going to grow the economy is to get people a raise that they deserve, to increase their wages because they've been flat so they can spend it. And that's what's actually going to create economic growth.
And the shareholders are not really that widely dispersed. That is, the top 1%, richest 1%, has 40% of the shares of stock in this country. The top 10% has 80% of the shares of stock. So if all of the productivity gains go into shares and executive salaries, you're not doing anything for most of the people.
You're not. And so what we've had is there are people who are doing great inventive work and technology work, and there are a lot of people working really hard, and that's what's creating the productivity. And then there are all these people who are going to MBA schools and going to the right schools and figuring out how to do rent-seeking behavior, how to take those productivity gains and figure out how they get the maximum share of that. That could be insurance companies, it could be pharmaceutical companies, it could be executives manipulating the rules we've set up. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to restructure the rules so that those gains, those productivity gains, are actually going to the people who earn them. One of the other statistics that you're aware of is that the rising healthcare costs are directly attributable to the stagnation of wages. If all the money that we're paying to pharmaceuticals because drug prices are going up and to insurance companies, right? So you're a small business and you get this huge bill and that bill is for healthcare costs of your employees. When I go in and get an EpiPen, I may not pay the $800, but my employer is paying it in insurance costs, and then my employer is paying the insurance company for their profits. Well, all that money could, if it had gone to wages, we wouldn't have had the stagnation of wages. So there are all these externalities on our economy that are sucking the productive work and distributing it unfairly. To
Democrats, led by people like you, are doing a lot on drug prices. You're doing a lot on, and you're really pushing the entire Congress on Medicare for all and on single payer, and that's terrific. Let's get the other Democrats on board. But does any of this have any real practical significance as long as Mitch McConnell is controlling the agenda from the Senate? In other words, why should people say, well, that's great, Khanna, go for it, when the Senate's not going to budge?
Well, let me make 2 points on it. Here's the advantage Trump has. And I've seen all your videos, and no one has been harsher on the president than you and some of the members of Congress, the Progressive Caucus. But there has not been a single person in Congress who has said about Donald Trump what Mitch McConnell said about Barack Obama. When Barack Obama was president, Mitch McConnell said, if Barack Obama has an idea that says the sky is blue, we're going to oppose it because we want to make him a one-term president. You know what people in Congress have said? If Donald Trump actually does prescription drugs, we'll pass it. We actually will work with him if he wants to lower the drug prices in this country. And McConnell would fold if Trump shows some leadership. It would be in Trump's political interest to get on the bill that Elijah Cummings and Peter Welch are saying, which is to allow Medicare to negotiate or to have an international reference price so Americans don't pay more than other countries. And if he were smart, he would seize that opportunity. So
if he were smart, if pigs could fly.
If he cared about re-election, he would seize the opportunity. So the small window of doing anything till 2020 is that Trump realizes that he can do some populist things, and he actually has a Congress that'll help him do that. If that doesn't happen, here's the value of having an agenda. One of the problems with the Republicans when they got all three branches of Congress and lightning struck is they had no idea what to do with it. I mean, they really they just said repeal, repeal, repeal. And we're just saying repeal the Trump policies, and we got to repeal a lot of them, the tax cuts, the getting out of Paris scores. But if that was just the Democratic agenda, then when the stars do align and we have all three branches of government, hopefully in 2021, we're going to be in that same starting place. I rather that we have through the House passed Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, an infrastructure bill, the right tax reform, so that the new president can hit the ground running. And of course, on climate change, the Green New Deal. Let me give you one example in the Green New Deal, because people say, oh, that's all fluff, and what does it really mean? That's not the case. Ed Markey and I are working on a bill that would talk about incentivizing electric vehicles to put workers back to work with those GM factories that closed down. The GM factories closed down because people aren't buying sedans anymore. They're buying sports utility vehicles. Well, there's no incentive to make sport utility vehicles that are electric. If you had a tax rebate for electric vehicles, not you get a tax refund and that helps people who want to buy Teslas, but a tax rebate at the point of purchase, and you link that to domestic manufacturing, you could get an electric vehicle fee in the next 10 years of 50% of American automobiles, and you could put people back to work. Those are the types of substantive policies we need to pass through the House.
Well, let me ask you on that, because our time is almost up. On the Green New Deal, how important is a carbon tax?
Very important. I mean, I think we need to have a price on carbon. And look, I was even willing to say, I'm listening to Republicans, and some of them are saying, yes, climate change is a man-made problem. I said, great, I'm going to join the climate change caucus. They said, okay, we want to have a price on carbon, but we don't want, like your idea of investing in solar and wind and infrastructure. We just want to give it back to the American taxpayers. I said, fine, just put the tax on carbon. I'm even willing to go along with your tax and dividend. And then I get the bill. You know what the bill has in there? Deregulation of the EPA. They said, well, if we have a price on carbon, we no longer need the regulation of the EPA. That's the kind of thing that we're dealing with in the Congress, that even when you're trying to compromise, they have such an anti-environmental view. But I think a price of carbon is important. And I think what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said, we need to deal with deforestation. We need to deal with investment in alternative energy, solar, wind. We need some form of carbon capture. And we have to do all of the above in the next decade to prevent the rise of temperature to go to 2 degrees and to keep it to 1.5 degrees.
So what I hear you saying is that what your job is, the progressives' job is, and even the Democrats' job now is to set the table for 2021, in effect, to get these ideas, give them currency, educate the public about them, get us ready for what we should be doing and should have been doing anyway, and not necessarily just beat up on Trump, or not necessarily just wait for him to become, what do you say?
Smart, or even have shrewdness of political instinct. I mean, to be self-enlightened of what's going to help his own case. But here's the thing. Trump campaigned as a populist, and there was a diagnosis of the problem, right? And that's where Democrats have to be self-reflective. A lot of folks, you were one of few voices talking about communities and people left out, and how for the last 20 to 30 years, the policies we've had haven't helped a lot of communities. And I've been traveling to a lot of those communities, and they're not angry about the possibility of America or angry at Democrats. They're frustrated that they don't have someone who's fighting for them and who cares about them. Trump went in and said, I get you. I understand that your frustration. And he sold them a bunch of lies. He sold them basically that if we stop the immigrants and if we revise these trade deals, which he's not really doing, is just cosmetic, that their lives are going to improve. Well, now they know that their lives haven't improved. But what they want to hear from progressives is that we, understand that the past policies haven't worked, that we acknowledge their pain, and that we have real ideas for what's going to help their lives. I think there's a moment in this country for substantive politics where people are going to say, when you go to a doctor, you actually care if they're successful in doing the surgeries. When you get someone as a plumber to come to your house, you don't just care about their marketing. You care, can they fix the leak? They're going to want politicians who are actually going to have real ideas to fix and improve their lives.
And that they can trust will implement those ideas. I mean, I think a lot of the distrust in the public is, well, you have a lot of ideas, and every campaign season you come up with all your policies, but I want to see results. And that is also, I think, undermining our democracy. Cynicism.
I agree with that. And that's why I said that tactically, the shutdown was a win for Democrats. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is the first person who's won a battle with Donald Trump. And
hooray for Nancy Pelosi!
Hooray for Nancy Pelosi! I've seen her stature grow in the caucus. I mean, all the skeptics they don't speak up anymore after her battle. It was a win for the Democrats. Everyone understands it was Trump's caused shutdown, but it was a total loss for the progressive movement because at the end of the day, the Republicans don't care about government. They don't have that argument to make. They say, look, it's a bunch of dysfunction. Cut. Government can't do anything. We're trying to make the argument that government has to be a force in this country for building our human capital, for helping the working class, for being a counterweight to excessive wealth in the private sector, and that you have to trust government. And every time we have an incident that further erodes the trust in government, it leads to this kind of cynicism. And that's why it's not an easy situation we're in our democracy. But I think that the 2020 presidential election, we're going to need people who have the credibility for a lifetime of work on these issues and who are going to have real policy. And I think that's why it's so important for the House to pass things. Because if they just gave us a majority and we say, well, we can't do anything because of Mitch McConnell or Donald Trump, that's not going to inspire confidence that if we have all three branches of government, we're going to suddenly be able to get things done.
Well, I want to get into so many other issues with you, like what's going to happen with Mueller reports, and we have an impeachment, and everything, but we don't have time. Khanna, I want to thank you for your leadership. Quite seriously, you were elected in 2016, and in a very short amount of time that the Democrats have actually had some power back in the House, you have already fulfilled a lot of what many of us hoped you would be doing. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your voice. I just read your stuff, and then I take it to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you.